Hey everyone, welcome to Coded Row. In this video, we're going to be going over some major components and changing everything in the sample in our Ascent Combat Framework project over to Synty or whatever character that you want. You can use Paragon assets or whatever asset pack you're using, and you can use whatever static meshes that you want. So for example, our Synty polygon doesn't have any animations that come with it, but we do have the skeleton, and that's all we really need in order for us to use Ascent Combat Framework just to match it up. So as you can see that we have an NPC and we change some of the outlining component, make it a little bright, and it has nothing in it. We also added our horse shadow bug and we changed it to low poly and fixed the physics asset so that it will go around perfectly, not ragdoll, and so on. And you'll see that I've changed the weapons and added sockets to my sword and my offhand as well. And we also added a shield for our blocking component, and we've also made it so that whenever we block, it doesn't consume of any of our stamina and we take no damage. We've also configured a couple NPC AIs in order to attack us back using the defender AI that comes naturally with the ACF sample. And you'll see that when I block, I'll play a little animation, get stuck, and they can do the same. And you'll see it's very game-like. And configuring ACF to work with Synty is amazing. Thanks to TCMate's IK retargeter that's in the description below, and you will need to download that for the tutorial which I go over. Thanks for watching Coded Row, and I'll see you in the tutorial. Hope you enjoy it, and this is a full Patreon request, so thanks for watching. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I'll be using the Polygon Dungeon Pack, which looks extremely nice. I love this low poly asset. Synty does an amazing job at delivering tons and tons of models that we can use. And they are not animated by default, but thanks to IK retargeting in Unreal Engine, we can easily retarget them and use them in Ascent Combat Framework. So once you install this, open it up and migrate it into your project, you're going to be able to see this Polygon Dungeons folder and open up this demo map. And now when you open up this Polygon Dungeons demo map, you'll be greeted with some beautiful low poly graphics like this. And if the lighting is too bright, you can turn down the bloom just by going over to the post process volume. Under details, you can just click this drop down for the bloom and lower the intensity, or just turn it off. And this might be easier on your eyes just because before it was super bright. So here's how it was before and after you turn it off. Or you can just turn it down to 1 and give it a little bit of bloom effect so you have that shine from the light. So now what I want to do is head over to TCMape's channel and download this IK retargeter he made so that Synty assets work properly for Unreal Engine mannequins. I believe Synty is in the process of updating it, but this asset pack has been released for over a couple years and expected Synty to do them themselves. But let's go ahead and check out the link below, which will lead you to this video, which will take you to this video, and it's called UE5 Synty Polygon Retarget Assets Project Included. And you'll just hit that subscribe button, open up his description, and click on this drive.google.com, which will lead you to an animation folder. And you'll see this UE5 underscore syntyrig.rar file so that you can unzip it. And when you unzip it, you'll extract it all to a folder and open it up to a project, which will look like this. And now all you want to do is just go to content, migrate these assets over to your folder, and I'll select the folder that it's in. And once that's done migrating, you'll see this Synty folder appear on your character, which comes with an IK retargeter and so on. So this is the skeleton that we're going to be using primarily for our Synty models. So it's the sk underscore Synty underscore polygon underscore unreal. I'm going to hit F2 on my keyboard to bring up that rename thing, but it'll automatically highlight over all of it. So I'm just going to hit Control C to copy. And now what I'm going to do is head over to my blueprints folder. I'm going to head over to my full sample, blueprints, characters. Oh, whoops. I'm going to head over to my Polygon Dungeons folder, look for my meshes, characters, and now I'm just going to highlight over all of these skeletal meshes with the pink undertone under it and just right click and then hover over skeleton, assign skeleton, and I'm going to have to do this multiple times. So I'm just going to copy paste or paste that name in and just select that new skeleton that the retargeter is using. And I have to do this one by one for each and every single mesh. But luckily there aren't too many mesh in this pack, so this should be done anytime now. And now once that's done, I'm going to hit Control-Shift-S to save all or go to File, Save All. And there are a few things we need to adjust. So in my full sample folder, I'm actually going to go over to my world settings and look for that ACF full game mode. that we're using, and then go to my default pawn class, which is the ACF full player UE4. And now I'm going to click on this magnifying glass with a folder behind it to find it directly into my folder. So it'll lead me to my full sample blueprints character player folder. And I'm going to double click to open this up. And now it's going to open up this blueprint editor that we can play around with. And when you change your skeleton mesh to one of the meshes that we created, it's going to have this weird arm looking structure. So I'll actually do, so for this video, I'll just be this, I'll be this goblin war chief. And he's gonna have these weird arms just because we didn't change the ABP, so the anim class. So this retargeter, luckily TC Mabe already did this for us, but if you go over to that Synty folder, you're gonna see this ABP underscore Synty. And when you double click it, all it's gonna do is just assign that retargeter into the output pose of our anim graph, and that's basically just gonna replicate our animation or what our character is doing with the main manning. And because Ascent Combat Framework already has a skeletal mesh under the main mesh component, we just need to set this skeletal mesh to our Synty character and the anim class to our ABP underscore Synty, and you'll see that it gets fixed up right away and we can hit compile and save. And now when I go back over to the map, I'm going to hit play and my character looks perfectly fine. And so he can run around just fine. He can hang out and all that. He can even dodge roll and so on, basically copying the animations that the Ascent Combat Framework is doing already for us. But you'll see that that sword is not really in a comfortable spot, and that's because we need to set some sockets up because this does not look the most comfiest. So yeah, we need to fix that. But I'm sure goblins are built a little differently, so he's fine. So I'll hit escape to cancel the editor or get out of the editor and go over to this sk underscore Synty polygon unreal, double click to open this up. And on the side of this, I also want to open up this skeletal mesh of the main ACF character. So I'm just going to go to this SKM Manny and open up the ACF underscore UE5 mannequin. And on the left side under the names, you're going to see a bunch of these sockets such as rifle equip, SH sword equip, staff equip, and so on. And all we need to do is copy paste this over to our character and we can line them up a little later. So I'm just going to shift click over all of these. And because it is spine 05 and Synty only goes to spine 03, it won't copy paste properly because it's not aligned with the same spine name. So if I were to just paste it, it's just going to come here at the top under root. And all I need to do is just drag it to my spine 03 one at a time. And if I shift click, it wouldn't work. I'm not too sure why that's the case, but it's okay. I'm just going to drag these in one by one directly on the spine 03 and I'll hit save. And if I go back and do it with the pistol equip for the spine 03, you're going to see that this one actually does work because the bone names are the same and I can paste it in directly. So now under hand underscore L, I'm just going to copy these sockets and I'll look for hand underscore L here and it'll paste just fine because again, the bone names are the same. And now let's look for another one. So under hand underscore R, I'll copy the arrow to the to weapon R in this case. So hand underscore R right here. And now let me see if there are any other sockets that I'll need. So there is a kickstart and kick end for your calf underscore R and ball underscore R and so on. And that's if you are going to have kick animations. I'm not, so I don't need to copy this over, but you can if you want. So I'll save all, Control Shift S, go back to my demo and hit play to make sure that the sockets are fine. And now you'll see that on the back of my character, I have the sword. And when I hold it in my hand, it is backwards. So all I need to do in order to fix that is just turn around the sockets and just place them a little properly. So in order to do that, I'm going to go back to my polygon skeleton or my Synty skeleton. And I'm just going to go over, this is the hand underscore, this is the right hand. So I'm going to go over the single hand weapon and I'm going to right click to add a preview asset. And I'm going to look for some sort of sword. And in this case, I'll just use the ACF. I'm just going to add one of those swords in here. Not that one. So I'll add this and you can see that it's pretty backwards. So I'm just going to flip it 180, tilt it down a little. And I'll just make sure that it's just going over my thumb a little bit and it looks like it's in my hand. So I think I will straighten this up a bit, just like that. And when I hit Control Save, that will probably be fine. I'm actually going to point it forward a little better, just like that. And then for my left hand, I'm going to add something into my left weapon. And I'll add a preview asset of another sword. And I'll just flip this 180, bring it down a bit and up, and just line it up the best you can, whatever looks good to you. So now I'm going to go back to my demo and play my character, and we equip it. Now they look a lot better, and it looks like he's actually holding them properly. And that looks great to me. So I'll put these back, and I will exit out. And now what we want to do is those swords aren't really the stuff that we're going for. So let's go ahead and create a couple melee weapons and replace those meshes. So back in my content browser, I'm going to go to my full sample folder and blueprints, and then look for items and weapons. So now this is where all the ACF weapons are by default, and I'm just going to add a few of my own. So I'm going to right click, and under blueprint class, I'm going to look for an ACF melee weapon. And now I'll hit select in order to create one, and I'll just call this something like I'll just call this sword 01 underscore BP. And before we actually get into this, I need to turn on a plugin called Skeletal Mesh Editing. And in order to do that, you're going to head over to Edit, Plugins, and look for a Skeletal Mesh Editing Tools and make sure this is on. You might have to restart this. And we're doing this because a lot of Synty assets do not come with the skeletal mesh. They're only given to you as static mesh. And what this will allow us to do is when I go back to my demo, let me double click to open up the sword 01 BP and go back to my demo folder. So we just want to open that up in its own tab. And I'll go ahead and close the rest of the tabs so it's not too cluttered. And now in my Polygon Dungeons folder, I'm going to go over to meshes and items. And you're going to see that every single thing in here is a static mesh. Oh, so we're going to go to Polygon Dungeons, meshes, and weapons. And you're going to see that everything in here is a static mesh and we have no weapons. So I'm going to create a couple things actually. So I'm going to right click on this Ornate Shield, and there's an option for me to convert to skeletal mesh. And I will just add this as so. So it'll remove the SM underscore and just add the SKM for skeletal mesh. And I'll hit convert here. And it'll just place in my weapons folder, which is exactly what I'm looking for. And the sword I'm going to be using for this is, let's actually do this bone and just call it a sword. So I'm just going to right click on this bone, convert to skeletal mesh, and that's good to go. And for the second one, I'll do an actual sword. So let's do so I'm just going to right click on this great sword and convert this to a skeletal mesh and hit convert. So I'll hit Control Shift S to save all. And now let's go back to our sword 01 underscore BP. And now the first thing I'm going to do is while sword 01 underscore BP is selected, I'm going to give it a mesh asset. And in this case, when I go back to my folder, I want it to be this SKM underscore weapon greatsword. So I'm just going to paste in that name, or you can type to look for it. And now you'll see this sword appear. And now there are a few things I need to do in order to have the sword actually work. So first, when I scroll down on the right side here, you'll see a tab that says ACF. So I'll sword 01 selected, you'll scroll down on the left here, and you'll see this tab called ACF. And over here, we can handle its weapon type, and animations and overlays that we're using. So for the handle type, I will leave this as a one-handed sword. And the weapon type in this case, it's actually going to be our melee sword. So I'm going to look for an item dot weapon dot melee. And under this option in the full sample that you're using, you'll see an option for a bunch of different items. And in this case, we're going to be using the sword. And for the moveset, we're actually just going to select moveset by itself because that is the default in Ascent Combat Framework in the sample. And if you're starting from a new project, then you probably don't need the moveset because it's not set up. But if you do want to set up moveset as your default, you're going to head over to your project settings, and then you can just type in moveset to look for it, and you'll see that the root tag for you might be set to blank if you're starting from a new project, but in the full sample, it is set to moveset for both the moveset type tag. And the overlay for this single-handed sword will actually be called moveset.singlehandsword. And for the action set, we're also going to be using the single hand sword. And the reason why we know this is because when we go back to our player character and open this up, you're going to see an actions component on the left side called ACF actions component. And now our moveset has multiple actions. So we have a moveset.single hand sword, bow, pistol, rifle, and shotgun. And as soon as we enter our moveset.single hand sword, which is being triggered by our equip when we wear this weapon, it will take this overlay. So many of our actions will actually get replaced or added on with this ACF underscore player sword actions. So we'll have both everything in the action set, but if we have any tags in this action set for the moveset.single hand sword, this will take priority over what's in here, but the rest of this will remain. So let me show you an example. So if I were to open the regular action set by Ascent Combat Framework and I'll collapse all, you'll see that if we have no item equip, this is the only stuff that will be used. And over here, we have an actions.attack, which is going to be our unarmed combat animations. So you'll see a punch here, punch like that, punch like this, and that. But if I were to go back to my ACF actions components and open the action set under my sword and open this up, you're going to see the same action called attack, just like we saw over here, actions.attack, and over here, actions.attack. And since we're setting it to an overlay of our moveset.single hand sword, this one will now take priority. So now our attack animations will look like this, because we're telling it that the sword in our hand is going to give it these tag names. So now let's go back to our sword 01 underscore BP, and now we need an on body socket name and in hand socket name. So in order to tell this apart, we're just going to go back to our character, and under the skeletal mesh, I'm going to double look for my skeleton, right click, and I can just go to skeleton and click find skeleton, and I'll double click to open up my skeleton. Or you can just open up your skeletal mesh and click skeleton like this. So the sword that we have so our equip is actually going to be back here for our SH sword equip, which stands for single hand sword equip. And when it's in our hand, we want to put it in our right hand in this case, which is called single hand weapon. So I'll just copy the name. And when I go back to sword 01 BP, our in hand socket name will be single hand weapon, and it is case sensitive, so make sure it's spelled correctly too. And our on body socket name is going to be SH sword equip. So now when I hit compile and save, this is now going to be using our weapon type, item, weapon, melee, sword. Moveset will be regular default moveset, and the overlay and actions will be the single hand sword. And now down here, we can add an equip sound and an unequip sound. So now if you scroll down a bit, after we set up our socket names, you're going to see some equip sound, unequip sound. You can add some attribute modifiers. So while it's equipped, what certain stats you get, or any special attributes, statistics, or so on. You can also set up the item information, which is going to be our thumbnail in our inventory, the scale of it, which is only going to size the thumbnail itself. You can name this, add a description, so when you hover over it, what it'll say, an item weight, and a world mesh. So the world mesh in this case is just going to show what it looks like when you drop it into the world. And then you can also select if it's a droppable weapon. And now for the item slot, we're going to need to tell the game where this is going to be equipped to and if it's going to be limited. So in this case, we are going to do item slot.melee weapon. And in order to see what item slots you have available, you'll go over to your character and then equipment and inventory component. And there's an available equipment. So you'll see that the first one on index 0, I have an item slot.melee weapon. And basically when I equip the sword, it's going to take place right here on my melee weapon. And don't worry if you're thinking about the offhand weapon or that left hand weapon, there is already one called left hand weapon right here. So I'll hit compile and save. You can add some sort of rarity system using tags. And now what we need to do is under the ACM tab, we actually have to add traces in order for other objects or characters to take damage from our sword. So in order to do this, we are going to add a damage trace, and I'll just call this DAE. And now when we open this dropdown for the DAE trace I made, we're going to apply some radiuses, maybe a trail length to determine how long the trail length is, and attack sound. So for the attack sound, I'm just going to do some sort of whoosh sound. So I'll look for a sword swing. So I'll select that. And then we can also add an attack particle. And the default one in Ascent Combat Framework is actually set to P underscore melee trails roar buffed, and this will give it a little glow every time we swing. And there are a few things that we need to set up still, which is the start socket and end socket. And it's by default, it's already called start and end, but we don't actually have that on our sword. So the first thing it'll do is this will enable the trace so it knows where our weapon can hit from. So ideally we want to place the start socket right above this hilt, right where the blade begins, and the end socket to be right at the tip. Doesn't really matter where the start and end are, but as long as it's on your skeletal mesh of the weapon, then that's the important part. And the start and end socket will also determine the start and end of the trail. So the trail will be this long and it'll also follow wherever the sword goes. So for example, if it slashes this way, the trail will also have a little length that follows it. And you can set the trail length over here. So let's go ahead and add these start and end sockets onto our weapon. So I'm going to scroll all the way up, double click onto the skeletal mesh asset, and you'll see our weapon right here. So now we need to add some sockets. So let's right click on root, click add socket, and I'll add one called start. And this is case sensitive, so make sure it's spelled exactly how it is on your sword 01 BP or whatever you named it. So this is called start. So I'll just put the start over here, and I'll add another socket and call this end, which is going to be right at the tip of my weapon, right over here. So I'll hit Control Save and go back to my sword 01. And I'm going to change the damage type to ACF cut damage type because this is a sword. And I did change the radius to 20 just so it has a big radius that we can attack on, and just so hits are a bit easier to register. So now let's go ahead and try this out. So I'm going to hit compile and save and go over to my ACF full player UE4. And now in my equipment and inventory component, I am going to actually just replace the starting item weapon for my ACF sword BP to my sword 01 underscore BP, just like this. And I'll hit compile and save. And now when I go back to my demo map and hit play, you're going to see that the sword is correctly on my back. And it because of its low poly feel, it feels a lot more natural for my character, and it's equipping exactly how it's supposed to. But in this case, it is actually backwards. So I am going to just turn it around by going over to my skeleton and flipping the sword 180 degrees, just like that. And now I'll go back to my demo and you'll see that the sword is now flipped. And now if I were to slash the sword, you'll see that the trail, there's this weird or this whoosh trail behind it, and it is making the sound that we set it to whenever we attack. But we also need to test if this works on an enemy. So let's go ahead and try that out after we set up our left-handed sword. So with my sword 01 BP selected, I'm going to just click anywhere inside this viewport and hold Control and B on my keyboard so that it'll automatically take me to the folder in my content browser. And that's just a quick shortcut for you to know so that if you want to travel folders efficiently, just wherever you're looking for whatever you have open, you can just do that using Control B. So now I'm going to right click, go to Blueprint class, and create another ACF melee item. But I could actually just click on my sword 01 BP, right click, and click duplicate, or use this keybind called Control D. And now I'm just going to call this offhand sword 01. And now I'll double click to open this up and make a few changes while I open the full blueprint editor. So the first thing I'm going to do is change this mesh, and I'm just going to change it to that SKM bone weapon 01. And now I'm going to double click to open this up and add those start and end sockets. So the start, I'll just leave it at the bottom, and then I'll add another socket at the end, and that will be at the very top, just like that. And now I'll go back to my offhand sword 01, and I need to change a few things here. So for the handle type, I'm going to change this from one hand to an offhand weapon because this will be on my left hand. And for the weapon type, I'll still leave it as an item.weapon.melee.sword, and the moveset will just be moveset, but I want to get rid of this moveset overlay because an offhand shouldn't be affecting that. I only want my primary hand to change that. And I'll leave the moveset actions to be single hand sword. And now I need to look for what my on body socket name and my in hand socket name is for where my offhand is. So I'll go over to my skeleton and look for those. So you'll see that under my SH weapon, it is actually called LH sword equip for my back. And in my hand, it's called left weapon, just like this. So I'll go ahead and go over to my offhand sword and just put those names in. So my on body socket name is LH sword equip, and then my in hand socket name is left weapon, and I'll hit compile and save. And now we can play around with the equip sounds, unequip sound, and so on. And one very important thing is I want to change the world mesh to that bone so I'm just going to change it to that weapon bone. And then for the item slot, I want to make sure that it's not also equipping to my item slot.melee weapon, because if that's the case, it will only work for one of them, because in my equipment and inventory component, I only have one item slot.melee weapon. So I'm going to change it to the left hand weapon. So I'll go back to my offhand sword 01 and change this to left hand weapon and hit compile and save. And now I'm going to go back to my ACF full player UE4 character and go to my equipment and an inventory component. And for my starting item, I'm going to go to the wherever my left hand weapon is, which is my ACF left sword in index 7, and change this to my offhand sword 01. And I'm going to hit compile and save. And I'll go back to my demo map and hit play. And now you'll see that I have both weapons, and when I equip it, this will be in my hand, and the bone is in a very awkward position. I'm guessing that's just how the bone mesh is, but we can see that these traces are turning on, and let's test it out. So the ACF full sample BP, or the ACF full sample, does come with some AIs. So we're going to go over to the full sample folder, blueprints, characters, enemies, and there's an ACF defender that I just want to place and drag and drop here. But if I hit play right now, he is just going to stare at me, but he's not actually going to move at me once he gets my attention. So I tried dragging this ACF defender AI right into the map, but it crashed as soon as I looked at it. But I just want to show you that this defender might just stare at you, but I guess in this case it's just going to crash. And that's because you need to add a nav mesh. So if you go over here to quickly add to the project, you can just look for a nav mesh bounds volume, and I am just going to make this as big as the map, and this will allow the AI to move around. And now when I hit play, we're going to test to see if our weapons actually work. So this guy came at me instantly, and when I go ahead and click T to target, I can start attacking him, and you'll see that our weapons are registering some hits. He's able to block it, and we're able to pretty much just destroy him. Nice. And that pretty much just confirms that our weapons are working correctly. So now next up, let's add a shield and test that out. So now in my Polygon Dungeons folder, I'm going to go to Meshes and go to Weapons. And we already made this SKM of the weapon Ornate Shield. So I'm just going to copy paste that name. And now back in my Weapons folder for my full sample, I'll click Full Sample, go to Blueprints, go to Items and Weapons. I'm just going to right click over here, go to Blueprint Class, and create another ACF melee weapon. And I'll click select and call this shield underscore ornate underscore 01. And I'll just double click to open this up. And now once that blueprint editor is open, the first thing I'm going to do is select that ornate skeletal mesh like so. And this shield actually does look pretty big, so I may have to adjust some of the settings on it. And under the ACF handle type, I'm going to change this to offhand because technically our shield is an offhand. And in this case, I also want to override the main hand overlay because we're going to have our own shield overlay. So for the weapon type, this will be an item.weapon.melee.shield. And for the moveset, I'll leave this as none because I don't want it to affect the moveset because the sword will do that. And for the moveset overlay, we're still going to be using the single hand sword moveset for both the overlay and the actions. Now I want to open up that skeleton to see where my shield stuff is. It's for my on body and in hand socket. So I'll right click. So this is going to be under my hand L. There is a tab for shield. I'm just going to right click, add a preview asset, and add that ornate shield. And I'll just flip this over and have it aligned with my hand. And you'll see that the shield does look really big, but no worries. We will play around with that and fix that up. So I'll hit save, go back to my shield ornate 01, compile. And the on body socket or the in hand socket name was shield. So I'll just set this to shield. And now my on body socket name is shield equip. So I'll just paste that name in. And just like the others, we can add an equip and an unequip sound, add a thumbnail, description, and I'll just call the shield with the description of shield. And we can add the world mesh of that ornate shield when we drop it to the ground. And for the item slot, we are actually going to select the left hand weapon for this. So I'll click this plus sign to add an array item to my item slot, click on this drop down, and look for my left hand weapon under item slot. Because I only want this shield in my left hand or the offhand weapons that we've been making. If I have it as its own item slot, then there's a chance that you can actually equip both a shield and an offhand weapon together, and that wouldn't make any sense. And now in our components, we're going to need to add a block. So an ACF block, and I'll just leave the name as is, click on it, and we want to define our defending modifiers. So under the attributes mod, you can add an array element, and let's say this is a value of 85. And the attribute type will be the block defense modifier that's already in your full sample. And what this is going to do is that when you block, you'll still be taking damage. It'll just reduce your damage drastically. But if you set this to a value of 100, you won't be taking damage anymore. And under block directions, you can select what kind of damage this is going to block. So for the shield, because you hold it up in front of you, it's going to block front only. But if you were to make something like some sort of hologram shield that covers you and all your characters, kind of like Winston's from Overwatch, for example, then you can change this to every direction. And now we'll add a few items in our blockable damage. So we're going to be able to block the ACF cut damage type, ACF huge impact damage type, ACF impact type, and we also want to block projectiles. So basically all the melee type of items or melee attacks will be blockable, and the magic ones will still be able to go through. And now I'll go over to my collisions comp. And in order for our shield to work, we're going to need to make sure that we have a physics asset assigned to our shield. So I'm just going to go back to my shield by clicking on the skeletal mesh. And under asset details, I'm going to scroll down and you'll see that there is no physics asset assigned. So I'm just going to click on this drop down, create a new physics asset, and call this ornate_PA. And I'll just leave that in my Polygon Dungeons mesh folder or in my weapons folder. And I'll just create this asset. And now let's try this shield out on our character. So I'll go back to my ACF full player UE4, go to the equipment and inventory component, and let's replace a shield that's already here with this one. So I'll just click on this plus sign to add another starting item, open this drop down and select this Ornate Shield 01, and I'll hit compile and save. And now when I go over to my demo and try this out, I will click I to open up my inventory, go down to my shield and equip this. And you'll see that it takes the spot of my offhand weapon, and now I'll click 1 to equip both. And when I hold my shield, you're going to see that it's right in front of me, and I have my sword out. And this is looking pretty good to me. But my hand is sticking out a little bit, and if I do get attacked there, it is going to take some damage. So I'm just going to adjust the socket a little bit. So when I go back to my skeleton, I'll just drag my shield out just a tiny bit, just like that. And that looks pretty good to me. And let's say you find the shield to be a little big, you can just click on your shield bone and just scale it down from right here. And don't forget to also scale it down on your back as well. So I'll leave the one on my back pretty big, and I'll put this one really small just for demonstration purposes. So I'll put this right on my hand like this and leave the back one to be big. So when I go over to my map and hit play, and I'll equip my shield, you'll see that it's really big on my back, just like how it is by default. And then when I put it in my hand, it's super tiny, just like we set it up as. So I'll just fix the size of that and the one on the back as well. So you can scale your sockets, which works perfectly fine. And just like that. So now I want to make an enemy that's also Synty, and I don't really want to use the generic ACF defender. So what I'm going to do is go over to my full sample weapons folder again by going to full sample, blueprints, items, weapons. And we already created the sword 01 and shield ornate for us, but let's make a couple more for our enemy. So for the sword 01, I'm just going to duplicate this by holding Control D and calling this sword 02_BP. And for the shield, I'm just going to call it shield_02. And let's take a look at how easy it is now. Since we already set up the main shield, all I need to do is just change the skeletal mesh to another one. So I'll head back to my folder where my Synty meshes are, go to weapons, and I just need to convert whatever I want to be a skeletal mesh. So I'll just do something like this, the Ornate 2 shield, or actually I'll do this red shield, right click, convert to skeletal mesh, and I'll hit convert. And for one of the swords, let's do something like this cutlass. So I'll right click, convert to skeletal mesh again, and hit convert. Now I'll go over to my shield 02 and change that skeletal mesh to the new shield, as we can see right here, hit compile and save. And I'll go over to my sword that we created. So this sword 02, open this up and change this to the cutlass. But remember that the only thing we need to change here now is to double click on this cutlass and add a start and end socket. So I'll just right click, add socket, call this start, move it up here, and then I'll right click, add another socket, and call this end, and I'll click save. But I do want to double check my traces just to make sure the start and ends don't have any capital letters on it. And they don't, so this is perfect. If you want to make any adjustments for your sword, such as changing the whoosh sound and so on, you can do that right here. So I'll just have this kind of sound for the cutlass, hit compile and save. And now I'm going to go over to my defender enemy. So I'll go to the full sample blueprints, characters, enemies. And for the defender, I can just right click and duplicate this, and I'll call this ACF low poly defender enemy BP. Double click to open this up. And a few of the things I need to do is I'm going to go to the viewport, just click on this mesh, or you can just click mesh over here. And I'm going to change it to, let's say, and in this case, I'll be fighting this female knight, and the material didn't change. So I need to change that to the dungeon 01. So I'll change it to this. And then I also want to change the anim class to ABP underscore Synty, just like we did for our own character. And I'll hit compile. And now I want to go over to the equipment and inventory component, and I will just change a few of these. So I want to give it some melee weapon and a left-hand weapon, which is going to be a shield. So as you can see, it has a sword, health potion, and shield. I'm just going to change this to the sword 02, and I'll change the shield to the shield 02, just like that. And I'll hit compile and save. And now let's try dragging and dropping this over in our map. Let's see how it works. So when I hit play, you'll see that it's still a T-pose and it's moving around kind of odd. So let's go ahead and fix that. So in order to fix the AI, I'm just going to go back to my ACF defender enemy. And now when I'm in it, I'm going to make sure that under ACF, the main character, it's just set to ACF humanoid, ABP, and the SKM Manny, and same with the mesh. And what I actually want to do is just go ahead and click add while the mesh is selected and add a skeletal mesh. And this skeletal mesh will be my female knight. So I'm going to click on this, select the skeletal mesh of that female knight, click on this, and for the anim class, I'm going to select that ABP underscore Synty that we made. So you'll see that it's replicating exactly, or it's copying exactly what this Manny's doing, but we don't want the Manny to be showing. And if I were to go to my mesh and actually check this hidden in-game, it wouldn't render and I would just T-pose. So all I need to do is go over to my mesh and give it some sort of transparent material. So if you might already have this in your project. So if you start searching for transparent, you'll kind of see an empty looking material that you can set to transparent, or just make a really easy one real quick. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So I'll go back to my content browser, right click, create a new material, and I'll call this M underscore transparent. Double click to open this up. And all I need to do is hold 1 on the keyboard or right click and create a constant and leave the value at 0 and just connect this to the opacity. And you'll see that it's hovered out and it's not actually working. And that's because we need to change our blend mode to translucent. And now you'll see that opacity shows up and we can hit apply and save. And I'll go back to the AI. And for the mesh, not the skeletal mesh that we created, but for the mesh, the character mesh 0, we're just going to apply that transparent material to both of these so that it's hidden. And now when I go ahead and compile and save, drag it out to my map and try to fight it, you're going to see that this AI is working perfectly fine. And let's go ahead and try out the shield by equipping our shield. So I'm going to right click and let's test the hits out. So you're going to see that the shield's working, but we are losing stamina when they attack. And if your character doesn't actually have any stamina, then it's not going to work and you're just going to be taking damage. So let's go ahead and show how to disable that stamina usage. So I'll head over to my ACF full player UE4, and now I want to look for my actions component right here. And I'll open up my action set. And in your action set, when you open your actions, there is going to be a actions.block right here. And I'll just open up this action, drop down the ACF, open up this actions configuration. Okay, so not the actions component. So in order to fix that stamina consumption by my shield, I'm going to go over to my shield where we created this. And under my ACF block component, you're going to see that there is a damage statistic multiplier. So it's set to 1, and I'm going to change that to 0. And now hit compile and save. And now when I go ahead and block, you're going to see that I'm not losing any stamina at all and not taking any damage. Never mind, she went under my shield. And I would need to configure that for her shield as well because she is taking a little bit of damage. So I had to restart my engine because I was getting some major performance issues, but now I have more than 90 FPS. And I'll make that in a separate video on how to optimize your Unreal Engine, just in case you are getting some FPS issues. But let's go ahead and set up our scene in order for us to have some of the NPCs and so on and make it very Synty-like. So I'll go ahead and just drag out my NPC vendor over here, have him face forward, and I think I'll shift him away from this statue a little bit. I'll double click to, actually, you know what? I think I will just go over to my blueprints characters folder and there's an ACF vendor NPC, and I'll just right click and create a duplicate called Synty underscore vendor underscore BP. Drag this one in instead, and I'm just going to double click to open this up. And we're essentially going to do the same thing we did with our AI. So I am just going to click on my mesh, click add a new skeletal mesh, and I'll just call this vendor NPC. And for the mesh, I'm going to set these two materials to M underscore transparent. And for vendor NPC, I will set the anim class to the ABP Synty, and let's select a character to be our vendor. So in this case, I'll just do this goblin male looking character who looks pretty broke. Doesn't look like he has much to offer, but let's go ahead and try this out. So when I hit play, I can talk to him. He's highlighted with that outliner component that we have set up, and I'll click E, and he has nothing. I think the full sample might be pretty empty in this case. So if you want to change this outliner, you can just head over to your main character or whatever character you're using. So the ACF full player UE4, double click to open this up, and there is a ACF outline component in your component section, and you can add the sharpness, texture size, brightness, extend, and so on. And you can even change the color. So for example, I'll just do something like a light blue, and I'll reduce the sharpness to 2 and the brightness to 2 as well. And now let's go ahead and try that out. And you can see it is a little bit light blue. It might be a little hard to tell just because it is still really bright. But yeah. And let's add some AI enemies down there. So I'll go to the characters folder and then enemies, and I'll just add a ACF, the hero female over here, and I'll duplicate this and I'll do ACF knight EB or BP. Double click to open this and just change the mesh from my female knight over to my knight. And I'll just change the name to knight. Now I'll compile and save, drag this one out over here. And this one will be a defender as well. So when I go ahead and hit play, you're going to see that both characters will have a sword and shield. But let me actually change the weapons on these because it's not low poly and it does look pretty odd. So I'll go to that equipment and inventory component and just change that ACF sword to sword 02. Or actually for the knight, I'll actually give it the same one that I'm using, the sword 01. And the shield will be the shield 02. And for the other character, I'll do the same thing, but just give it some different combination. So now when I hit play, they're both going to have their shields and swords and so on. And they're going to work together to try to fight me because both of them are on the same team. So another very important thing is we want to change the horse. So I'm just going to drag this horse out, and it doesn't really fit my style. So I'm going to, all the animations are currently provided by Malbers, which does amazing low poly and realistic animals. So this horse anim set provided by Malbers Animation, we already have some of these animations in ACF as default, but it does come with a bunch of beautiful meshes. And I just want to change it to the low poly one, this one right here. So I'll go ahead and add this to my project by clicking add to project. And now when it's done loading, it's about 500 megabytes. So I'll go back to my game. So now if I were to open up my ACF horse mount BP, open this up and change this horse mesh to, let's say the low poly looking one, which is the horse underscore PA, you're going to see that it looks great over here. But when I hit play, it's actually just going to melt just like that. And that's not really the kind of horse I'm looking for because I have nothing to ride on. And this guy is just kind of just chilling out there. So what we're going to want to do is just go back to our horse, open up the skeletal mesh, and under asset details, I want to scroll down to this horse underscore physics asset v2, double click to open this, and I'll select everything from pelvis to tail O5. And while that's all selected, I'm going to go ahead and so while this is all selected, on the right side, I'm going to see this details tab, and I'm going to look for physics type. And instead of simulated, I'm actually going to change this to kinematic. And now I'll hit save here or save all, go back to my demo. And now when I hit play and ride this horse, it won't melt, but now that you'll see that my character is on very different. And that's just because the socket isn't really pointing forward on my character. So let's go ahead and fix that. So when I go over to the horse's skeleton, like so, there is something called a mount point. And you'll see that on the y-axis, it's pointing to 90 under relative location. I can either just turn this by 90 degrees like this, or just set this middle one to 0. And I'll hit compile, and get on the horse. And now you will see that I am on the horse perfectly. I can rise it up a little bit, and my horse is kind of jittery just because of how the ground is. But when I walk, it's totally fine. And now you'll see these guys be so jealous of my horse, they're going to start attacking me any moment. So she's in awe right now. Oh, I guess they respect me so much, they really don't care. Never mind, he's angry now. And that's a pretty long overview on how to set up your project properly, change everything to low assets, and reconfigure our Synty characters. Thanks for watching Coded Row. Like, subscribe, comment below what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.